My name is Jarrett Brown. I live in Green Bay, Wisconsin. I'm 34 years old. I was born in Charlotte, North Carolina. I have lived in a wide variety of places, including Tucson, Arizona, Seward, Alaska, Dutch Harbor, Alaska, Dodge City, Kansas, and Green Bay. I've also spent a lot of time in Nicaragua, Mexico, and Puerto Rico. So far I've visited, so far it's 2020, I'm 34 years old. I've visited 42 states. Basically the only places I haven't visited yet are South Dakota, the New England states, and Hawaii. So I've done a lot of traveling in a really short amount of time. My favorite states in the United States to visit are Alaska, Texas, Arizona, North Carolina, I think. The thing I like about Alaska is that it's just so big, and there's not that many people there. So there's a lot of public land, a lot of wide open spaces, a lot of really large mountains. There's forests, there's ice fields, there's just mountains as far as the eye can see. There's all sorts of rivers and lakes and bays and of course the ocean, obviously. And then Texas, the thing I like about Texas is it's kind of like a country. They call it the Republic of Texas because historically it was basically its own country, and it's gone back and forth, been controlled by different countries, including Spain, Mexico, and the United States. And the interesting thing about Texas is that there's a lot of different cultures there. A lot of times people think about cowboy culture whenever they think of Texas. And that's definitely there because there's a lot of really large ranches, and for the last couple hundred years ranching has been important to Texas. So that's there, especially in the smaller towns, South Texas and Panhandle, which is in North Texas, and then throughout West Texas and stuff like that. So that's definitely there. But there's also in cities like Dallas and San Antonio and Austin, there's a lot of diversity. There's African American people, there's people from Mexico and all different countries in Latin America, people from Asia, so you see a lot of that in Houston. And so Texas isn't exactly what you might expect, what you might have heard about. There's always something new that you can find in Texas. And it's such a big state, there's so many different things that you can do there, that you can see there, that you can experience, that you can, places you can visit. Just a really interesting, fun state. And now especially the state is changing in terms of demographics, in terms of politics as well. It used to be a very conservative state, and now especially in the larger cities, that's changing a lot. So it is a kind of, it's more, the best way to say it is that it's more welcoming than probably it would have been in the past for outsiders. And the other states I've mentioned were Arizona. So Arizona is the first state that I ever lived in other than North Carolina. And I went there when I was younger. I was 20 years old. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to leave North Carolina, so I left. And over the course of a month, I went to a lot of different cities, including Atlanta, New Orleans, Austin, El Paso, Albuquerque, Santa Fe, Denver, Boulder, Phoenix, and then I ended up in Tucson. When I got there, I wasn't running out of money, but I needed to start working just because I'd been not working for a month, and I'd never done that before, and I just wanted to be productive, and I wanted to settle. I wanted to figure out what I was going to do. So when I got to Tucson, I just liked the vibe of it. It was like this city, like almost 1 million people in the city, or at least in the county at that time. And then at the same time, even though it was a big city, it also had like it has these big mountains, so you can leave the city and just within a few minutes you'll be way up in the mountains, with not that many people around, and just a whole different way of life. And so you might be experiencing the desert heat in July or August in the city where it's 115 degrees or whatever it is, and then drive 30 minutes up into the mountains, or an hour, and you'll be where it's 75 or something like that. And so you could experience kind of different ways of life and different climate zones and all that just in that same area. And the thing I liked about Tucson, or another thing I liked about it, was that it has the University of Arizona there, so there's always things going on, like talks you can go to, lectures, all the sports teams. The basketball team was really good then, and I think still really good now. The football games, just a lot of stuff going on. And the food in Tucson is really good, because there's a lot of Mexican influence, so if you like tacos and that sort of thing, you could always find something good to eat. There's so many different places that every day you could try something new, and by the end of the year you still won't even hit anywhere close to all of them. So that's always cool. And North Carolina, I guess, is the other state. It's my home state, as I mentioned, but it's a state that's still important to me, even though I don't live there anymore. I just lived there a few years ago. I went back for a short time, for a couple of years, but it's not some place that I want to live forever. I would like to go back there eventually, probably when I'm older, and live maybe not in my home city of Charlotte, but some other part of North Carolina, maybe the mountains, maybe towards the coast, just to experience the different parts of North Carolina that I've heard about but I haven't visited. And when I say that, what I'm talking about is that North Carolina has 100 counties or so, and I probably haven't even been to half of them. May have been through more than half of them, but I haven't visited and spent time and got to know a lot of these places. So there's still, even though I grew up there and I lived there a long time, and I've visited lots of times, there's a lot of parts of North Carolina that I don't know, and that I would like to know. And I hope that hopefully one day I'll get to know those places. But as I was growing up, when I was a kid, I spent a lot of time in the Charlotte area. I was born in Charlotte and lived in South Charlotte as a small kid, and then we moved to Union County, where Monroe is located, and I grew up there for most of my childhood. I also spent some time in Salisbury, and then also Chatham County, where Pittsboro and Siler City are. And most of the time when we went on vacation, when my mom and dad took us on vacation, we would go to the mountains. We would go towards Marion, Linville, that area. And sometimes we would go visit our friends in Spruce Pine. But that was mostly where we spent our vacation time. I think I went to Asheville, North Carolina one time when I was in middle school for a trip, and we went to the Biltmore House, which was impressive and large. If you have any idea what that is, it's the largest private home in the country, and it's basically a big castle, and it was owned by the Vanderbilt family. And but other than that, I haven't really spent that much time in other parts of the mountains. I've maybe driven through or ridden through, would be a better way to say it, since I don't drive, different parts of the mountains. But most of my time that I spent was in the Linville area. And also Morganton, that's another story for another day. I was brought in the hospital for about 3 months when I was after 7th grade, in between 8th grade. And one good thing about that is it's right there on the edge of the mountain, so a lot of times we would go on trips to like Lake James, or we would ride to the mountains and just, take in the scenery and stuff like that. So that was nice. And of course, from the hospital itself, you can actually see the ridge of the front range of mountains. You can see Hawksbill and several of the other peaks that are along the Linville Gorge. And so that's a memory that will always stay in my brain. It always stayed with me. And I was saying earlier that I haven't really been to a lot of places in North Carolina, and one of the places that I haven't been is the beach. And you would think, since North Carolina has these beautiful beaches, they're very famous, very well known all throughout the world. They have these big lighthouses that are seen in TV commercials and all sorts of stuff. But I've never been. And the reason is because whenever we went to the beach, we would always go to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, or some other beach near Myrtle Beach, in that area. And I don't think that's abnormal, because I think a lot of people in North Carolina, either they go to the beaches in Virginia or they go to the beaches in South Carolina. And I'm sure, of course, people go to the ones in North Carolina too, but since they're along the outer banks, they're kind of hard to get to, and so I think it makes it a little bit more difficult for people to travel to, so they just don't go all together. But one day I hope to be able to go and see those lighthouses and see the wild horses that are there, and just experience that way of life, because from what I understand, it's completely different from everything else that you know about North Carolina. The way people talk, what they eat, how they live, what they do for work, this sort of thing. And a lot of those towns are really small, so I just like to see those and visit those and take part in whatever it is they do there. One thing that kind of always keeps me connected to North Carolina is excuse me, sayings that I learned when I was growing up, just from listening to my dad and my uncle and my grandfather talk. Just from listening to my dad and my uncle and my grandfather talk, they all have this southern accent, which you might be able to hear a little bit in the way I talk, especially when I feel relaxed. It's just real easygoing drawl, kind of just an elongated way of talking. And when you hear people from North Carolina talk, a lot of what you're going to hear is just these sayings that have been around sometimes for a couple of centuries or more, that people just kind of carry with them everywhere they go, because are just passed through the generations. If your grandfather said it, then your father heard it, and your father probably repeated it, and then you'll end up repeating it, that sort of thing. And a lot of these sayings are from the farms, from rural areas where people talked a little different than the people in the city did, partly because they were less educated and partly because they were isolated. And so they would just come up with ways of speaking or talking that other people didn't. And so when you hear those ways of talking now, it'll strike you as being funny or interesting or odd. Or you may think less of the person, but it doesn't really the way that people talk isn't a reflection of how smart they are, how intelligent they are, how educated they are, or anything else. It's just something that they were taught. It's something that they learned from being a kid.